Hey everybody, today I am reviewing Spotlight, which is directed by Thomas McCarthy. This is his fifth film, I believe. This film has an incredibly talented cast that has enough sophistication to be able to act in a very understated manner. Nobody here is really being showy with their acting, which to me really matches the very minimalistic and understated style of the film. You have Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, Liev Schreiber, Stanley Tucci, and the list goes on. And this film is based on true events that happened in Boston in the early 2000s, 2001 actually, and basically it's about the investigative journalism unit in the Boston Globe, and they come across a story about allegations made against the Catholic Church. And a few priests in the area were accused of molesting 80 or more boys throughout the years. And of course, nowadays that's more common knowledge, but at the time it was considered quite shocking. It was scandalous, especially because Americans didn't know how to deal with this kind of information because, you know, the church is deeply embedded in the ideologies of American culture, and it's hugely fundamental in terms of how the country was built in the first place. And just like many of the corporations that have been built over the decades, over the centuries, religion and the church has become a dominant conglomerate in its own right. That's the dilemma of the film, and it's not only just an overall dilemma, but it's also a lot of internal conflict with the actual characters, the main characters themselves, because many of them were raised Catholic as children. It's about lifting that veil, so to speak, on this puritanical society, whatever that means, and something that people thought that they knew and that they trusted, and revealing this dark underbelly of society that, you know, so many terrible things are happening that people do not acknowledge. I loved this movie. I thought it was a wonderful piece of filmmaking. It works on so many different levels. It works as a great investigative piece, it works as a social commentary, and it's also a very gripping, suspenseful piece of filmmaking. And it never overdoes a single aspect of what it's trying to convey. This film is extremely reminiscent of a lot of those very minimalistic, raw 1970s films like All the President's Men. That's the easiest comparison I can make because they both are very, very similar. And then of course, I felt like as I was watching this movie, I was watching those great Sidney Lumet films like Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico. Spotlight works right along with those films almost perfectly because there's almost no fat to trim here. I mean, they get right down to it. It's very direct. There's nothing at all that is superfluous, and it's not a glamorous Hollywood movie in the slightest. Everything feels very, very real. The office settings are very bland and ordinary, and the wardrobes of the characters feel just very mundane, and they don't draw attention to themselves. Not in a boring way, but they're just trying to capture the details, every little thing that makes you feel like you are living in this world, every single tense and immediate moment that these journalists are feeling, you feel like you're right along with them. And this movie really celebrates professionalism, and it celebrates what investigative journalism can be. So you don't see much about what's going on in the characters' lives other than what's in their professional lives, but the film always just gives very subtle hints of what's going on in these characters' personal lives so that you are able to build enough sympathy as a viewer. And they are never overt about it. It's always just kind of a little thing here or there. You know, in a lesser film, probably a lot of the characters would have, you know, paused the rest of the film and gone into this very wordy anecdote, and that just would have really detracted, I think. As these characters are discovering all of these really troubling facts about all these priests, and as the facts start to build and build and they find more and more information, you just get sucked into it right along with them. One thing that really makes the movie work is that it really does pay attention to the time period. It takes that time period of 2001 and makes it a major focal point, which is something that raises the stakes. 2001 was a major turning point, not just for Americans, but for the entire world. I mean, it was the start of a new millennium. And of course, 9/11 happens right in the middle of when these journalists are trying to gather all this information on the church. And priorities start to shift in a very different direction. And the world becomes a lot darker and a lot more cynical as a result. Also, we start to see the internet becoming a lot more prominent, a lot more relevant as the 2000s start to progress. So the old world of the newspaper and journalism is starting to die out, and these characters at the Boston Globe, they're not only trying to expose a very dark scandal, but they're also trying to save themselves and try to gather those readers that they might be losing so that they can continue doing important journalism. A lot of the characters you can see as they're trying to find out more information on this story, they are constantly going through, physical archives, books, and pages and pages of information. And there's very little digital work going on in terms of the internet. And not only does that show you how much times have changed since then, but I think that's very deliberate on the part of the director, because you're seeing all of these characters teetering right on the edge of the old world and this breakthrough into the digital world. And now we live in a time where nothing is secretive. Almost anything you can find just by the click of a button. It's easier to find stories and to discuss them and to expose the system for what it truly is. These journalists are right on the cusp of that, and it's almost as if they're introducing symbolically the world, in the story at least, to a different world where digging for stories and having to go do all this underground work is going to start becoming far more mainstream. And that's just one reason why I think the film has so many great ideas going on, and they're pulled off in the most effortless of ways. And the drama comes from underneath, which is very rare in a Hollywood film. There are a few things here and there that I would have changed just to give the film more polish, more sophistication. One big thing for me was the score by Howard Shore. I felt like it came off as very kind of cookie cutter detective music. I thought that the film deserved a lot more. I wish they were able to get somebody like David Shire. You should look up his music for another 1970s film that this film reminds me of, The Conversation. He did that score. And he also did Zodiac. That would have been the perfect way to enhance it for me, but I mean, I'm nitpicking. What's more important is the power that this film has as just a story and as something that is a social commentary. It's very relevant and it needs to be told, and you should absolutely see it. It is very entertaining. It is well made. It's a really great film. I'm so glad that I saw it. So that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page in the link below that one. Catch you next time.